Hey class, I'm going to talk about the short story, The Red Convertible by Louise Erdrich a little bit. The reason I picked this short story is that I want to use it as the model that I'm going to work with as we go through the research paper and the different assignments attached to the research paper. So one of the first assignments is that you have to answer a bunch of questions about your research paper story, which will happen next week. Don't worry about that right now. But I thought I'd go through those questions myself with you here, and so you can kind of just see where it's going and get a better understanding of the Red Convertible. So when I use it as for examples later on in the next few weeks, you'll have a better understanding of the story. All right, here's the question I'm asking. What's the name of your story? It's The Red Convertible. Pretty simple. Who is the protagonist of the story? I mean, whose story is it? Some people get confused by this. Henry has such a clear problem in the story, such a clear conflict. Sometimes people want to use him as the protagonist, but I've read this story a few times. I firmly believe Lyman's the protagonist because he is the one narrating the story, and I think that he has a problem. Basically, Lyman's problem is he wants to fix his brother, and that runs from the beginning of the story to the end. So I'm going to say Lyman is the protagonist here. Give me two separate character traits of this person. For each trait, describe an example. Okay. In the very beginning of the story, one thing I know about Lyman is that he tells me he's good with money, he's lucky with numbers, things like that, which tell me he's not the usual Chippewa Indian. He's a little bit unusual, a little bit different. I know that he's younger than Henry is. And so those are decent topics decent character traits to come up with. But the most important trait that I get from Lyman throughout the whole story is that he is a family-connected guy. He cares deeply about his family. I learned that in the very beginning. He has that restaurant that's destroyed by a tornado, and it doesn't seem to really bother him much. He says as long as he was able to have every one of his relatives to dinner, he got what he wanted out of that restaurant. And then, of course, everything he does for Henry, he's willing to sacrifice quite a few things for Henry. So I'm going to say those things. And the number one thing being that he is a person who cares for his family. What is the main conflict for this protagonist? Is that he wants to bring his brother back to the way he was before the war. Is this conflict internal, external, both? Explain. This is an external problem because he's trying to fix somebody else's psychological problem. There might be some internal problem, some internal conflict here, just in Lyman feels badly for his brother. But most of the story's action is this external issue. Who or what is the main antagonist of this conflict? I would say, really, in a way, Henry's the main antagonist, or no, maybe the damage Henry suffered because of the war. That's the problem that Lyman is trying to deal with. List any minor characters you feel are important to setting up or resolving the conflict. Well, obviously Henry is important. I don't think we don't need to talk about him much, but beyond that, there's almost nobody else in the story that's really important. I mean, the mother's in there a little bit, the character of the girl who they pick up and take to Alaska, but I don't think either of those characters have a lot to do with the ultimate point of this story. So I'm going to say I don't have much to say for this question here, which, that could happen with a lot of questions you run into as well. What is the moment of the story you think would be the climax? Well, if the conflict is that he's trying to fix his brother, I think the climax then is at the end when they go to the river and after Henry's fixed the car, and I think it's when Lyman confronts Henry directly when he's jumping on top of him saying, "Wake up, wake up." And Henry is telling him, "I can't. It's just, I'm not going to change." I think that's kind of the climax because even though there's a lot of emotion in the scene after that, I believe that I've read the story a couple times. I think at that moment, Henry gives up. I think there was a chance that maybe he would change before, but at that moment, Henry's kind of admitting he can't fix it. He can't be fixed. He can't get back to who he was before. And then, so ultimately, what happens at the end is kind of inevitable from that moment on. What is the story's point of view? It's first person from Lyman. Lyman's telling me his own story. What is the story's setting? Oh, wait, I skipped oh no. Let me go back. Is my character static or dynamic? Well, I mean, let's see. Henry is kind of dynamic. He does change as a person, but that's not the protagonist. Lyman's trying to change Henry. I guess really the only way Lyman can be dynamic is if he kind of accepted that he wasn't going to be able to fix Henry. And I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe he is dynamic. Maybe he does accept that. I don't know. There is an indication of a change in Lyman. It happens in this scene where he's talking about the photograph that his sister Bonita takes of him and Henry before they go to the river. There's a whole paragraph of description where he says, he can't look at that photo anymore. Something has changed in the way he looks at the photo, and that might be maybe that something with Lyman has changed about that. But honestly, this it's not easy to pick that one. So I'm not. I'll say at this stage I'm going to say static, but I'm going to think about it more. You can do that too. All right. What is the story's point of view? I answered that. What is the setting, time, and place? How important is it to the conflict? Well, I think the story. This is a story that kind of needs to be during the Vietnam War. I think that war works better than other wars. The place. There's no specific place, but I think the idea that these are Indians from they're Native Americans from the Northwest, and the whole area of the Northwest. The fact they drive up to Alaska, and the fact that river is cold at the end or when they go there. I think that adds something to the story. I imagine you could possibly tell the story in a different setting. You could have a different setting and still do the same things, but I think the setting is more evocative of mood than anything else. What's the significance of the title? Why did the author choose it? Well, the title, the red convertible. That's you'll see right here comes at number 13. I think the red convertible is a symbol in this story. It's one of those deals where the symbol, the author it's all over the story, and then it keeps coming back in the story, and so you realize, oh, this is important. And the main thing the story is about is this bond between the two brothers. So I think the convertible is a symbol of the bond between the two brothers. That's why there's this argument with the keys or who's going to get to drive it. That's why it's all beat up at a certain point. That's why it gets fixed. That's why it gets driven into the river. All those things are tied into the bond between the two Lyman brothers, between the two Lamartine brothers. Give me an example of irony from your story. All right, an example. Well, it's sort of ironic that Henry fixes the car only to kind of accept that he's never going to be better. He's never going to be in the condition the car was. The car can be fixed. He cannot be fixed. And it's kind of ironic that Lyman gives him the car at the end, driving it into the river when his brother has died. See, a potential theme statement for your story. When I'm trying to do theme statement, what I want to do is always think, well, what are the issues of the story first before I try to come up with a point. This story, if I'm writing a theme, I'm not writing a theme about, well, I guess I could write about the effects of war or just big or real serious trauma that changes a person who you care about. And then the issue is, can you fix a person like that? And I think the story's saying, no, you can't. Sometimes the trauma is so big that even if you love somebody, you can't really help them. That's like a key part of the story. And I guess all that you can do really is to try to understand them or just accept it, because there's nothing else. So in a way, I think the theme of the story has to do with the bonds of love actually having kind of a limit to what they can do, because there are some outside traumas that affect us so deeply that it doesn't matter that we want to be fixed or that other people want us to be fixed. All right, so that's my opening thinking about this story. I think it's a really good story. I think the first paragraph is confusing. It's not easy to figure out until you get to the end of the story. Then you go back and look at that first paragraph again and say, oh, I see. He's telling me, basically told me what was going to happen to Henry here. There are some questions some people have sometimes about what exactly happens in the river because Henry jumps in. He's saying my boots are filling. I think based on my idea what the climactic moment of the story is, I think that it's pretty clear that he commits suicide, and he kind of knew he was going to do it, and that's why he that might even be why he fixed the car and decided to drive out there. So that's my initial understanding of the story, and I'll be coming back at it later as we start looking at some of the examples of research paper assignments, and this is the story I used. All right, everybody, good luck with your own story.